good afternoon. Hopefully after lunch you still have some energy to stay awake. So I'm Sheryl Staub-French. I'm a professor of civil engineering at the University of British Columbia, and I'm happy to be presenting today the work that was actually led by the first author, Dr. Zadeh, and the second author, Dr. Bhonde, who's a postdoc in my lab. And it actually follows on very nicely from the previous presentation, which is looking at BIM maturity at the project level, and how can we align that organizational maturity with the project level maturity. Okay. So the presentation will be, I will finish in 10 minutes. It looks like a lot of things that I'm covering, but I'm going to say a little bit about us and the problem statement, and then talk a bit about the methodology and the case studies, and then get into the findings and the conclusions. So our lab, we call ourselves a BIM topics lab. We've been studying BIM adoption and digital delivery for over 20 years now, and have found that these 4 dimensions are really critical. So the technology dimension is pretty obvious. We need to understand the technologies we're evaluating, which is what the previous presenter just talked about. But equally important, and if not more important in some cases, can be the organizational context. How do we design our organizations and our project organizations to create the right environment for innovation? And then what are the enabling processes, and what is the context? Because every project has a different context. Every organization has a different context. So this is a framework we use when we're working on projects and studying projects, and we've studied dozens of them. And this framework, we've applied it on many projects. This shows some of the example technology uses we've studied. One is like VR for maintainability input, design coordination, we've done a ton of work, lean design management. And more recently, we've gotten into looking at the owner's side and digital handover. And so how can we better evaluate information quality and asset information delivery processes as well? I'm going to emphasize the organizational context, because that's really what we're kind of talking about with this paper. We've worked with a lot of different organizations in the supply chain, large owners, small owners, and we've done a lot of particular studies around collaborative delivery methods. So how does IPD work in practice? And then the last thing is around process enablers as well. So I say all this because a lot of this work is what motivated this particular paper, what we've observed time and again on these different projects. And so the practical motivation is very consistent with what the previous speaker said, is that we've got organizational maturity assessment that's well developed. We've got a lot of project level requirements that are well developed, but there's a disconnect between what's happening at the project level and the organizational maturity assessment we do. And so this is the gap that we're trying to address in this paper. So theoretical background, there's a lot of great tools out there to do organizational assessment. I showed one on the previous slide. A lot of work that's been done to evaluate what criteria do you use to do organizational maturity evaluation. And then there's been some work at the project level, but it's been typically pretty high level, not at the level that we think it needs to happen. So what we see is the challenge is this significant misalignment between the actual needs of construction projects and the BIM capabilities of the teams involved. And that really affects how BIM implementation happens on projects. And so we think that the cause is this lack of project level maturity assessment. And that leads to this disconnect between what the project requires and what the teams can actually deliver. So the objective is, how can we assess team maturity for BIM uses at the project level that's driven by project needs? And so we propose this 3-step project level maturity assessment process. Based on that, I'm going to talk through that with 2 case studies, and then talk about the strategies for how you can leverage that new information to better understand how to implement BIM on these projects. And an important thing that I want to emphasize is that we're trying to enable low maturity organizations to contribute effectively. In Canada, we are a bit lagging. We don't have significant maturity, and so we're in this transition phase. And so really trying to bring in these low capability organizations to participate. So we are very applied in our research. We do detailed, deep ethnographic case studies. So the 2 projects we're going to talk about, we were on the project for 1.5 to 2 years. We used mixed methods, collecting, a lot of hours of interviews, over 200 meeting observations. Did this 3-step process with some follow-up validation. So the 3 steps are, first, starting at the project level, what are the project needs and what are the corollary BIM uses that you need that you can leverage to address that problem? How can we think about responsibility of executing on those BIM uses and assigning that? And then how can you assess maturity at that project level and use level? So I'll now step through that for each of these 2 projects. So the first one is First and Clark. This was a project downtown Vancouver. From a project perspective, not that complex, but from an organizational perspective, very complex, because there were 3 owners and they were trying to execute IPD, and they've never done it before. And no one on the team had done it before. So we were on that project for a long time. And what we did is we looked at what are the different project needs. So it's complex from an owner perspective. It has a tight schedule, things like that, and identified what are the specific BIM uses. And so we were working with the team on this as well. But looking back, these were the 6 uses that were most closely aligned with the project needs. So these 6 BIM uses were identified. And then for each of these, looking at what is the responsibility of this specific organizations on the project and what was their maturity for that use. And so the first part of this, you can see here, we've got the different BIM uses. I'm trying to get the cursor over here. The different BIM uses, and then the responsible leading party. And then given this is IPD, there's a whole support network because everyone's in it together. Hopefully everyone knows what IPD is. It's shared risk, shared reward. It's like collaboration on steroids. It's incredible to be a part of this kind of a project. From there, looking at the BIM maturity, it was not a very mature project organization. Many of the organizations did not have a lot of deep skills. But when you look at it based on the uses, they actually had the skills, most of them had the skills that they needed for the uses that were specified. So this is where you can see that disconnect between the organizational level maturity and the project level use-based maturity. So this was one analysis that we did. And then the next one was for this bioenergy research demonstration facility. This was a very complex project. It was an existing facility. It had large equipment that needed to be brought into this facility and replaced in very tight spaces. So again, we were on the project for over a year, observing all of this. And again, what were the needs of the project? So the dense environment, the need to better understand clearances, the complex installation sequences, given that they had to route around existing equipment, and then communication across the team. And so with this, the initial state looking at the capability, 60% of the members of the team had little to no BIM experience. So very much lacking the expertise to address the needs of the project. The general contractor then hired an external VDC consultant that enabled the whole team to lift up its capability. So with this, if you look at the BIM uses and the responsible parties, these 4 different BIM uses and the direct responsible parties, which then got supplemented by the rest of the team. And then this got disrupted based on, or enhanced, based on the addition of the VDC consultant. So the initial BIM maturity could be quite low for the uses that they required, but because they had this external consultant, it changed the dynamics. So again, this disconnect between project level and organizational level maturity. So what do we do about this? What does this mean? For us, we see project level assessment as being critical. So we have to be able to understand what's going on at the project level, what are the needs at the project level, rather than sort of organizational assessment. The other important outcome was that low organizational maturity doesn't have to be a barrier. And so there are these ways, either through delivery models or enhancing the team, that can address these gaps in maturity. And that can, if more owners did that, that helps to enhance the whole industry ecosystem, because the more maturity that the industry has, the more that you can execute on these types of projects. delivery models can be an important lever for organizations, for owners to take advantage of the capability of a team. So with IPD, you have this team first mentality. And so people help each other out. You know, they're incentivized to help each other out, and that can help to enhance the maturity of the team. And then early alignment is key to making this all work. So some final thoughts. You know, we presented this 3-step framework, and the key takeaways is the need for this project-specific BIM maturity evaluation and the early need identification that needs to happen to make that successful. There are definitely limitations. We're just getting started with this, just based on 2 case studies. The qualitative scale needs to be further investigated to ensure generalizability. And we want to move from assessing maturity to really evaluating the quality of what is actually being produced. So it's kind of addressing a comment that was raised earlier. And then wanting to develop more measurable indicators of each BIM use to better understand maturity at that project scale. So that's it. I think I'm on time, close to being on time.